the world? Is that what we've become as a church? We've got to have doctors. On our marquees, it's got to say Dr. such and such. Okay, I'm done. But the religious leaders said, show us something. And Jesus takes this and he does something very interesting. Verse 19, Jesus says, destroy this temple, I'm going to raise it up in 3 days. And they exclaim, no, it's taken us 46 years. There's no way that you can rebuild it in 3 days. But Jesus knew what he meant by that. And he says, at the very last verse, he says this, after he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he had said this, and they believed both the scripture and what Jesus had said. And then look at this. Because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust him. So Jesus did do some miracles. They wanted to see some miraculous signs, but Jesus wouldn't show it to them. Why? Because they demanded that he do these signs. They wanted to see some proof, but Jesus wouldn't give it to them. He performed all kinds of miracles around Jerusalem at that time, but he wouldn't do a dog and pony show for them. And we begin to get a sense about Jesus and how he feels about these religious leaders. And he calls it the yeast of the Sadducees and Pharisees. Let's go to the book of Matthew. The book of Matthew, the 16th chapter. And I've got it up on the screen here, but Matthew, the 16th chapter. And this is a point where we begin to learn how Jesus really feels about these religious leaders and what's really going on with them. And why we need to pay very close attention to what's going on with them. Matthew 16. They're out on the boat, and verse 5 says they laid across the other side of the lake, and the disciples discovered they'd forgotten to bring any bread. Watch out, Jesus says, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they said, oh no, Jesus is talking about bread. We've got to bring bread. How can you guys forget to bring bread? Oh, but Jesus said, you know what, you guys, I'm not talking about that. Don't you remember the time that I fed the 5,000 with the loaves and the fishes? And how many baskets do I have left over? The book of Mark says, he asked them that question. They said, we had 12. And then we fed the 4,000. And how much do we have left over? 7 baskets. I'm not talking about bread. He says, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I love this next verse. Then at last they understood he wasn't talking about the yeast of bread. He was talking about the deceptive teachings of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees. Why am I talking about that today? Why did I decide to bring up the subject of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? It's critically important that we understand that sometimes religion gets in the way of God. That seems odd, doesn't it? How can religion get in the way of God? Because isn't that what religion is about? Isn't religion about God? But Jesus gave a very, very stern warning. Beware of the yeast of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Paul also gives us a very stern warning. He says this. Let me just kind of run out of time, so let me get this. It says in Colossians, the 2nd chapter, let your roots grow down into him, and let your lives be built on him. Then your faith will grow strong in the truth you were taught and will overflow with thankfulness. Look at this next verse. Don't let anyone capture you with empty philosophies and high-sounding nonsense. And I'm afraid for 2,000 years, people have come up with some pretty high-sounding nonsense that comes about and sounds like religion. Jesus says, be very careful of the Sadducees and Pharisees' deceptive teachings. How can we identify that? How do we know what is the deceptive teachings of the Sadducees and of the Pharisees? Here's a perfect example. Let's go back to the temple. Remember we had the outside court? And then we had the inside area called the sanctuary or the holy place. And then we had a veil. And then we had the most holy place. When Jesus died, verse 50, then Jesus shouted again and he released his spirit. Verse 51. At that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. This is incredibly significant. This is the gospel right here. You have the outside. You have the inside, the sanctuary. You have the most holy place where only the high priest can go, and that can only happen once a year. And if you go in there any other time, you're going to be killed. The veil is ripped apart from top to bottom. Let's look at what the book of Hebrews says in regards to that. It says this, verse 19. And so, dear brothers and sisters, so we can boldly enter heaven's most holy place because of the blood of Jesus. By his death, Jesus opened a new and life-giving way through the curtain into the most holy place. And since we have a great high priest who rules over God's house, listen to verse 22. Let us go right into the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting him. So here is the significance of this. Here it is. In the old law, I would bring my lamb in. I would have the priest inspect it. If the priest said it was good, I would kill the lamb. And then the priest would make a sacrifice for me. And then once a year, all the sins of all the people would be atoned for to the most holy place. But because of what Jesus did on the cross, the veil was ripped from top to bottom. So here's what happens. I am a sinner. I have sinned. Hello, Father. I have sinned. I know you're glad to see me. No. It's better than that. It's better than that. Excuse me. I'm wrong about that. Here's the way it really is. Hi, Dad. It's me again. I sinned. You see the significance of that? We get to walk right into the most holy place. Last week we saw the verse, we are seated with Christ in the heavenly realms. We get to waltz right in. But here's what the religious fog, the teachings of the Sadducees and Pharisees do to us. Here's what they do. Where are you going? I'm going to talk to my dad. Well, what do you mean I can't go in? Well, I know I had a spat with my wife. That's why I need to go talk with my dad. Where are you going? I'm going to talk with my dad. What do you mean I can't go talk to my dad? I want to talk to him. Yeah, but you remember that Illinois driver that you screamed at because he cut you off? You can't go talk to him until you make that right. But no, it's my dad. He said I can come anytime. No, you got to go through the right procedure. What do you mean? I'm going to talk to my dad. What do you mean I can't go talk to my dad? Well, I know I looked at something I shouldn't have looked at, but I need to go talk to my dad and just lay my heart out. I know I need to talk to my dad, but I know I've been divorced, but I want to talk to my dad. You see, people put barriers between us and God. God does not put barriers. He says to us in verse 22, let us go right into the presence of God. But religion stands in the way. Beware of the yeast of the Sadducees and Pharisees. Beware when someone tells you that you've got to do certain things before you can go talk to Christ. You've got to come to church before you can talk to God. That's religious nonsense. I've got to go and I've got to take communion before I can talk to God. That's religious nonsense. The Bible says that we get to walk right on in. Why? Because it's not about me. I didn't sacrifice for me. I didn't tear the veil from top to bottom. God did. And He sets the rules.